I would like to introduce our speakers. Dr. Cullen Hegarty is the Program Director at the Health Partners Institute Regents Hospital Emergency Medicine Residency in St. Paul, Minnesota since 2013. He is an Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at the University of Minnesota Medical School. He has been at Regents since 1998. His medical and research interests include team leadership, wellness, and self-assessments. Prior to being program director, Dr. Hegarty was the APD in charge of recruitment, so he did the entire application process for 5+ years in that role, and now has done 5 matches in his current role. He was also the recent chair of the CORD SLOE Task Force. Dr. Bradley Hernandez is the Assistant Program Director in charge of Medical Student Education and Recruitment at the Health Partners Institute Regents Hospital Emergency Medicine Residency in St. Paul, Minnesota since 2013. He is an Assistant Professor of Emergency Medicine at the University of Minnesota Medical School and has also been at Regents since 1998. His medical and research interests include student assessments and working with CDEM, the SVI, and various clinical research projects. In his current APD role, he does everything from write SLOEs to review all applications, coordinate interview season, and the match list. I am going to turn the floor over to our speakers. Everyone should just self-mute their phones or computers, and at the end, we will open the floor for questions. Drs. Hegarty and Hernandez, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for inviting us to be a part of Cord Connects and to specifically do this presentation. When we were asked a while ago to do this, I was talking to Brad, and for both of us, this is an area that I think we have a particular interest in, and we really love interview season. So it was easy for us to say yes and to get involved and to get interested to do the presentation because I think we feel strongly about it. So thanks for having us. When you think of interview season and you think of kind of, why is this important to people? So for the people that are listening, the people that will watch this over the next few months, why is it of importance to us as programs, as program directors, as APDs? And I think a lot of it is that when you've been in a program for a while, you see that the day-to-day elements of a residency, that the success of a residency has everything to do with the quality of residents that you have. And so much of that starts with the type of people that you recruit when you get into your program. So for us, this topic is exciting because we love interview season. It's important because I think we know how much it plays out to the getting the right people into your program leads to then having them for 3 or 4 years and seeing how that just adds to the success and makes the day-to-day side of it easier, the better quality people that you get in your program, everything. So for us, this can get you some good information. Certainly as we're going through, keep a list of questions that you might have that if we don't get to them during the talk, we'll leave some time at the end of the talk to cover. So I'm going to turn over to Brad to start talking about just like the very entry start of application season. And here's what we're going to kind of go through in this time. So we'll start with just like starting in September, applications start coming in. How, as a program, how individually can you start thinking about application reviews and using the ERAS system and the ERAS program? Then we'll talk a little bit about the SLOE, a little bit about writing them. So you can kind of think, how is it important for the applicant? Through a little bit of like, how do you gather feedback from your faculty and residents and staff about candidates? What do we do to get a meeting together towards the end of the year to go over our candidates and start thinking about the rank list, which then will lead to how do you generate the list, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So with that said, with our introduction, we'll get up and running and start talking about ERAS and getting applications.
So I'll start by saying everybody does this a little bit differently. There's hundreds of programs, and the way that everyone takes a huge number of applications, 500, 1,000 applications, and narrows it down is going to be a little bit different for everybody. The goal, obviously, is to take a huge pool of applicants and try and develop a smaller pool so that then you can find the fit that's going to fit for your program during interview days and really get a good class of residents that fits your hospital. And everybody's hospital is going to have a little bit of a different fit. And we know that about each different hospital, depending on your patient populations or your learning environments or your research agenda, and different students will fit better into different hospitals. But it starts with these ARIS applications, which have a huge amount of data in them. And when they come in September 15th each year, it's always a little bit daunting, right? There's hundreds of them to start going through, and where do you start and what data points are really important. So every year when I'm at CORD and I sit down in the clerkship and residency director meetings, I always hear that the two most important data points that residency directors are interested in are grades and SLOEs. And the SLOEs are probably of utmost importance. And there's a lot of other things in the ARIS application. The USMLE step scores get used a lot. I personally think that we have an overemphasis of step scores. We know that step scores probably aren't the best clinical differentiator for who's going to be a great resident, but we still rely on them. And a lot of programs still use filters. About 2/3 of programs will use step score filters. About 1/3 of programs don't. So we know that the step scores are an imprecise measuring tool, but we still use them. So grades and SLOEs, I think, probably have the most value when you're talking about just overall ARIS applications. And then the question is, well, where does the SBI fit in? And I don't think anybody really knows the answer to that. I think when you look at this new tool, some programs aren't looking at it. I would say most don't know what to do with it. And then there's others that will probably look at it a little bit. I think applicants are a little bit skeptical of the SVI, and I think programs are still figuring out what's the evidence between that data point and whether or not students are going to make great residents. So, so the SVI is one of those things where that, along with the dean's letter, are probably a little lower in the priority list for their usefulness.
Yeah, and then as you look through things, so like as you get those hundreds of applications, what's your process that you would go through to kind of help start with some of that sorting and everything?
Well, so I try to be you want to be as objective as you can when you look at these applications. And to me, the most objective way to do this is really to compare applicants from the same school. So the filters within ARIS allow you to sort the applicants by school and then compare applicants from the same school. And to me, that allows me to read home institution SLOEs that then will be from the same group or the same letter writer, that will then tell me a little bit about their clinical strengths and weaknesses, but also compare one another and which of those strengths and weaknesses am I looking for as a APD that will fit well at our hospital, and helps me get a pool that I think are applicants that will fit well here. So to me, the most important thing I do at the beginning is sorting them by school and then comparing them one to the other. So I try to do this objectively, but I also try to do a holistic approach to this, right? Like every applicant has a different strength. Some of them it's leadership, some of it's service, sometimes it's research, and depending on what your program is, any one of those will fit better into your clinical environment. So doing a holistic review and looking them over is I think another really important thing, rather than just looking at step scores and filters and what their grades are and their SLOEs. So I think looking at the application as a whole. We do a couple things that are different. One of the things I do is I always try to look and see if I can find a local connection, and maybe other programs do this too. Sometimes it's obvious if there's a local connection to Minnesota where they went to undergrad here, or where they are from here, went to high school here, have family members are here and spent summer here, had summer jobs here. I always want to find those things. Sometimes it can be obvious. Other times I have to look at their cell phone number or look at their work experience and kind of come through. My experience has been that students that have a connection to an area both want to interview in that area and, more importantly, want to match and live in that area. So I do try to find a little bit of a geographic tie. If you're in Seattle or San Diego, you don't need as much of a geographic tie. People are going to want to go to those places. But for the rest of us that aren't sort of geographic all-stars, I think having connections to an area are really important things for us to know about when we're sort of going over these applications.
And some of those are a little bit more hidden, where it almost takes interview season to learn sometimes what somebody's connection is to the area.
Yeah.
But the more you can do it ahead of time, it is kind of nice to try to get people that seem like they have a little bit more of a tie or connection. Something that Brad mentioned that I want to make sure that we emphasize is, we've been doing this collectively for a while, and some of it is trial and error on a system to try to figure out what's the easiest way to do it, the best way to do it. And something that I think you stumbled across probably after months of doing it your first time was to filter it by school.
Mhm.
And that's what you mentioned. And I just want to highlight that I think as you're sorting through hundreds of applications, the advantage of sorting people by school is now you can compare a lot of elements of their application that will now be similar and get a sense of, if you get 10 students from that same school, you're looking at their SLOEs, you're looking at their MSPE.
Right.
There's a lot more similarities where it might be easier to do it that way than if you sort things alphabetically. All of a sudden you're going from school A to school B to school C, and it's different formatted MSPE. The SLOEs are from different places, and it's a little bit more challenging to do it than to do it by school, which I think you'd agree that now that you've done it that way, that was a huge thing that you started doing. That's probably pays off every year to save you hours of time, making it easy and probably helping us to pick the right people.
Yeah, especially when you're comparing SLOEs. The letter writers are always trying to tell you something. And the question is, what are they trying to tell me about this student? And if they use language in one SLOE that they didn't use in the next one, same letter writer, you can really use that language to try and differentiate each different applicant and what their strengths are. So, yeah, the things I don't do. So when you're going through that initial review, reading personal statements, nobody has time for. I really don't watch many SVIs. I just don't think any of us have the time to watch all those questions. I hate admitting this, I don't read the non-SLOE letters. They really do all say the same thing, and that is, Jack or Jill are the best medical student I've ever seen. They practice like a seasoned clinician. They have the, empathy and bedside caring of a nun. They are all the best students you've ever seen in your life. And they just don't differentiate the students in any way that I find useful. So I really don't read the non-SLOE letters. So there's certain things that you just don't have time to do. There's certain things I don't know what to do with. So when there's typos in their personal statement or grammatical things, I have no idea. Does that mean that they're shouldn't be on your list or should be? I have no idea. And the other one I don't know what to do with is the minor stuff. Someone got a drinking ticket when they were, 19 in college.
Right.
What do you do with that? I have no idea. So I don't think anybody has the answer.
Just from a ERAS standpoint and an initial screening standpoint, the other thing I'd like to emphasize that Brad mentioned is that for us personally, I think we try to pay attention to everybody's application regardless of their step 1 score. Certainly there are those students where they struggle with step 1, they struggled in preclinical years, they struggle with everything. That's different. We get the picture of that. But we have seen so many students that have had a little difficulty on step 1 just with a slightly below average or below average score that go on to do fine on step 2 that clinically are superstars, that are nice people. And for us, it probably takes a little more time than to review all those applications, but we find it pays off when you get them here for interviews, you interview them. So it's just something I'd recommend for people that are new to this and are trying to think through how to make application season easier. I know it's tempting to just say, let's just cut off people that have below a certain score, but I will challenge you that I think you're losing some really great candidates by doing that. Mm-hmm. And the goal of this process is you're putting time into this process anyway. The goal is to get the right people at the end and to get people that you're going to be really happy with for 3 to 4 years. So sometimes spending a little extra time getting into those applications, learning more about them, can really pay off. So
yeah, if I have a choice between taking a chance on a medical student with a low step score, mm-hmm. or taking a chance with a medical student with a below average SLOE, I would always rather take a chance on the step scores, because those are standardized tests that don't predict clinical performance, whereas a SLOE is sort of a very objective measure of what their clinical abilities are. And so, yeah, the step scores are really emphasized.
So speaking of SLOEs, as part of kind of our initial wave of application review, something that we wanted to touch base on was kind of 2-part. One, it's just that time of the year, so I thought I'd go over a little bit of tips from my standpoint on writing the SLOE. And 2, then as you're evaluating these candidates and you're doing the evaluation review on ERAS, certainly you're going to be reviewing the SLOEs as a huge part of that initial application review. And just give you a tip or two I have from that standpoint as well. So my background with the letters, I was on what was called the SLOER, turned into the SLOE committee through CORD for years. And we've done a lot of work looking into things with the letter to try to make it as easy as it can be to write and as user-friendly to program directors and programs as we can make it, with the concept of, as Brad mentioned, a lot of the narrative letters are just similar, and it's hard to get a sense of what is the difference between candidate A, B, and C, versus the SLOE. We try to make it a little bit more objective and then clarify those objective measures by a focused narrative section. So a couple things I just wanted to mention for people heading into the summer that are going to be writing letters. The first one is on page 1 here as you're looking at it. The reference provided by, I just strongly encourage people as best as you can in your institution to write group or departmental SLOEs. I think we know from studies that we've done through CORD that programs and program directors value those letters the most. So departmental or group SLOEs are the best way to go. So as best as you can as a program, I'd encourage you to do that. Every program has a slightly different way of what that means and how you go about doing that. But essentially what you're doing is you're taking a combination of clerkship directors and leadership and student education, residency leadership, and other faculty, and combining their expertise and thoughts and different ways of looking at things all into one letter. So you get probably the best version of feedback about that student, about how do we think that they will do in residency, and also where are they going to be on the rank list when you get that mix of people like that. So that's one thing I would really strongly recommend. As you click through the letter, the other thing that I always recommend is just make sure that you use all the boxes. We have the boxes there because we know that not all medical students are the same. And as you're comparing 20, 30, 40 students that you might be writing SLOEs for, we realize that there's a range of their abilities, and some are better at certain things than others. Some still need to work and develop in different areas. And using the boxes is a good way to just let people know that at that point, where are they at with their development? And then compared to other students, how are they doing and how are they kind of globally? And then predicted where would they be on your rank list. Same thing, take advantage of all the boxes, because every year we interview 120 people. We have number 1 to number 120 people. So we have people in the top third, middle third, and lower part of the rank list. As we're working with them as students, we want to think of it that way. Where do we predict they'll be on the rank list based on their performance? And to do that on the letter, it's a really nice way to just paint the picture for people reading it, to have a good sense of who they are as a candidate. And that's the goal of the SLOE, is really to help take people that might have similar performance in other areas and give them a good sense of what's their fit like with EM, how do they work with other people, how do we feel like they're going to do in residency from a guidance standpoint, and things like that. So things that can be really helpful for application season to know. That's the goal of the SLOE, is to have it there. And it kind of ends with the last page, which is really where, if you're using all the boxes and you're being honest with where the student is, this is the greatest chance now to really tell us why. So tell us why you checked those things. If you checked all the top boxes, let us know. It doesn't have to be lengthy, but just tell us, what is it about the student that's such a standout? What do they excel in? The flip side is, if you're checking boxes that are lower, this is where people are going to go to look to see why. And the most helpful part about putting that in there is then the programs, as they review these letters and read the SLOEs during application in interview season, they can now make their own decision about, is this the kind of candidate they want to invite out? So if you have a middle or lower third candidate, but clinically they excel and they work well with everybody, and they just struggled with the test at the end of the rotation, which led to a lower performance than other students that you had, and you have a high performing group of students. If you spell that out in the narrative section, there are a lot of programs that might look at that candidate and say, we're okay with that. That's our kind of person. And there's other programs that might say, you know, if they have test taking issues with that rotation, let's look a little bit more into their application file, and does that play out in other ways? So, but by being honest and by being clear in the narrative section, I think it really helps programs know why you checked what you checked. The flip side is, now let's put our interview season hats on, and we're reading all these letters, right? So you're reading hundreds and hundreds of SLOEs. the more clear that you are as a writer, it helps the slow reader. Something that we struggle with every year is when we get letters from somebody where all of a sudden their application looks pretty good. For whatever reason, they check that they're going to be, say, in the lower third of their rank list on the SLOE. And then in the written comments, they say things like, student did great student,
Best student
fantastic,
ever. Yeah.
had a great, and then you go, something's not jiving here, right? It's
Right.
what either they're not telling us something, which could be concerning, right? They're telling us by checking the box, but they're not saying it in the box, which means we're going to start filling in the gaps. Like the student did something bad during the rotation, they didn't work well with people, something they don't want to deal with, and they just don't want to spell it out. Or it's the flip side, which is, hey, it's a high performing group of students. They want to be honest and check all the boxes. There wasn't anything major they have to work on, but compared to the 50 students they're writing SLOEs for, this person just happens to fall in that group that might be in the bottom third. Well, if they can at least spell it out that way in the narrative section, it really helps when you're reading them.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would encourage people to do from an application review standpoint is if you ever get a letter like that and it's not totally making sense, feel free to contact the letter writer and follow up and clarify that. Because I'll tell you that we write 40 to 50 plus SLOEs a year. We get contacted rarely, but occasionally. We read hundreds of SLOEs a year. We contact a couple people a year just to kind of follow up and say, boy, we love this person's file otherwise, but we're not finding something in the SLOE or something's a mismatch. You know, they check the box that they need more guidance, but they don't say why. And we just want to know what it is about it. So throughout the process with letter writing, the clearer you can be, it really then plays out. So when people are reading the letters, it's user-friendly for them. And just my big tip on it is don't be afraid to contact the letter writer, the SLOE writer, because I think we've found over the years that sometimes it really is helpful. You know, we might be thinking one thing, right, and then we talk to them and all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's not what we were thinking. We didn't totally have it right. So that's kind of my take on SLOE writing and some tips, and also reading them. Any thoughts from your standpoint on?
Yeah, my goal as a SLOE writer is to never have anybody contact me, because I want it to be consistent. And that is, if I check the top boxes, I'll explain why they fit those boxes. And if I check the lower boxes, have an explanation that fits, and then that makes sense to the reader. I don't have to be contacted. And that makes me happy. There was one year I substituted the word conscientious for contentious, or it was a word correction, and someone contacted me about that. That one I can live with, but really write SLOEs that really make sense to the reader and the downstream users. And I think everyone appreciates that, and it just cuts down on the amount of work that everyone has to do.
So application season, you're getting hundreds of applications, you're doing your review, you're using ERAS, you're taking advantage of filters to sort it in the right way. We talked about letters, keys about writing them, keys about reading them. So now you're inviting people and they're coming out and it's interview season. We wanted to talk a little bit about the interview itself, structure of interview days, the dinner or event that you might host the night before. So let's go through that to just kind of let people know a little bit about how we do it here specifically and just some general tips overall.
Yeah, so our interview day, what we try to do is be as efficient in our time as we can. We typically will interview 10 people in a day. We'll have 5 that will show up at 7 a.m. and then another 5 that will show up at 10:30 a.m. And the goal of having the 2 groups is we try to have them overlap in the middle, so that there's certain things where a group of 10 can get information together. So during the overlap, after the morning group have done their interviews, we have them do lunch with the residents together. We have them hear about benefits together. And we have the 2 groups hear from our departmental leaders together. And then after those 3 things have transpired, then we let the morning group go, and we start the interviews with the afternoon group. And it really saves us, 90 minutes of time, where if we had to do those things separately with each group of 5, the day would be that much longer. Nobody wants these days to be longer. So separating the group of 10 into 2 overlapping groups, I think really helps us keep the group small and yet have overlap where we can save time. The other thing we do is one day a year, we do a joint day with Hennepin. So I think some programs in Chicago did the same thing a few years ago, where they tried to have some combined interviews for students that had rotated at both hospitals. So for us in Hennepin County Medical Center, we will have combined days for anyone that rotated at both programs. We'll have it at the university, so they're mostly university students, and therefore we go to the university since they already know our hospitals and do our interviews there. So it's just another way of taking applicants and trying to make it more convenient for them and less time consuming for us. So,
and that's something we've been doing now for 10 plus years. We get a survey with kind of feedback after each session, and the programs like it, but the students love it because it's really, they are essentially doing 2 interviews in one day.
Yeah.
They've already rotated at both of those sites, so they don't need a lot of the typical things we do on our interview day, like the tour and things like that. So it's been a great way to help them out, still function for us as an interview day,
Yeah.
but give them an extra day during the interview season that they can spend more time checking out other cities, other programs, things like that.
Yeah, and you think about how many cities there are that have multiple programs in them, that a lot of these students will rotate at two sites within one city, and so trying to coordinate with another program really helps them out.
Yeah.
You want to talk about applicant dinner?
Applicant dinner, yeah. So as I'm flipping through here, we thought it'd be helpful for people to see our, the first one was kind of what the applicants see on their end of how the agenda looks. And then these next 2 are from our standpoint, just how we keep track of where they're traveling around on interview days to make sure that we have them touching base with the right people in the right amount of time. So this is our morning group, we call it. You can kind of see from start to finish what they do. And then we essentially have similar look, but slightly different times for our afternoon group. So for those that want to go back and review this, it's just a little bit more of our time frame of how we do this specific day. But
and then the specifics of the day are worth mentioning. So
yeah.
We do 3 faculty interviews. Every applicant will interview with 1 chief resident. One thing we do that we hear is unique is we have the applicants do a one-on-one walking tour of the ED and the hospital, one-on-one with one of our residents, which they like because it just gives them an opportunity to ask more questions than when they're in a big group environment. So they like the one-on-one walking tours. And then we do a debrief afterwards where we will gather the residents that did the tours, the chief residents that did interviews, all the APDs and the program administrators, and we'll do a debrief afterwards. So.
And then after we debrief, we go out for happy hour.
Yeah.
And that's fun too.
Yeah.
The one-on-one walking tour is something that it's more labor intensive for the residents.
Yeah.
We ask them every year and we say, is that something you want to keep doing or would you prefer to do it more in the group format? And they're typically the ones that say they liked it when they rotated or they interviewed with us.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like even from their standpoint, they get to know the people better than if it's 3 or 4 or more in a group and they're leading them around.
Right.
So we've been doing it that way for a while. And we typically find that that's one of the best things that we do on interview day that we get good feedback on. So we talk about the interview day a lot, but something I wanted to mention is that most programs will do something where it's a night out before, a dinner or something like that before. As I get to that, one thing we wanted to show you too is this is our scoring sheet that we do. Essentially, we put in the upper left-hand corner a sticker that has their picture and their information. And then this is for program director, APDs, the residents that do the walking tour, and the chief resident. We all fill this form out for each candidate to give us a sense of that day. It really captures a lot of information about them, but it's super helpful at the end of interview season to go back and look and see what kind of notes we had on the interview day itself. So this is kind of how we do it in terms of just putting down some different notes about them, things that they might ask questions about, things we want to make sure we jot down so we remember for later. We do have kind of a scoring scale that we do that's essentially just a fit.
Yeah.
That's what the numbers mean is, do we feel like they'd be a good fit for here or not? So that's what the number means to us. And then whatever you pick, a little bit of justification of why. So that's really helpful. So something that I feel strongly about is I love having we have a dinner the night before our interview day. And why do I feel strongly about this? What do I think it does for the program and also for the applicants? For the applicants, I think it's critical because I think you come to interview and you get to explore the city, explore the ED, interview at the program. And if all you do is show up for the interview day itself, it's usually fairly structured and you do have a chance to ask questions and meet different people, but it's a little bit more of as we showed you what our agenda looks like, you kind of go from here to here to here to here, and then all of a sudden your day's done. The nice thing about the dinner the night before is it's usually over a couple hours. It's a little bit more relaxed time frame. They probably have the most resident contact during that time and get a chance to ask questions directly to the residents that sometimes are harder to ask during the interview day. So I think for candidates, they get a ton out of going to these dinners. I think for us as a program, we love them because we get feedback about the candidates through the dinners as well. So the residents like to hang out. They like to cook food. They like to have people over their homes and host these. And then throughout the evening, they just are chatting with people and learning more about them. And then they're able to tell us over the next few days, hey, here's something I learned about this person, or here's someone that I really think would be a great fit for our program based on conversations we had at the dinner. So I think that for the applicants, it's huge because you get information. For the program, it's critical because we get extra information that's different than just on the interview day. The other thing, another reason why I always like bringing this up, and Brad will chuckle when we talk about these dinners, because I feel like when we invite someone out for the interview day, I try to word this in our invitation that I think this dinner is such a big deal that if you're not going to make our dinner the night before, I think you should reschedule for a different interview day, just because I think they're going to learn a lot. We're going to learn a lot. And if you miss that, we're each missing a big part of what we could gain by doing that. The other thing is throughout the years, we've had some people that they come to town ahead of time. They're here. They could go to the dinner the night before and then they don't. And that drives me a little bit crazy because to me, it's just showing a little bit of commitment. Like, hey, if you're committed to coming and learning a lot about a program and you're thinking about your next 3 or 4 years there, you should take the time to go to the dinner if you're there in town the night before. So we've had people that are like, oh, I didn't make it because I have college buddies that are in town and I met them at Surly Brewing and we hung out the night before. I'm like, I'd like to go to Surly Brewing too, and that'd be fun. But to me, it tells you a little bit about your commitment level. Or someone that's here for a week and they've got family in town and they're like, oh, I couldn't make it because I had to go eat meatballs with my grandma. And I love that you eat meatballs with your grandma, but it's an hour, or two. You can go and hang out with the residents, learn more from them. So that's kind of my take on the dinner. I think it adds a lot. Historically, we get good feedback from the candidates that they really do feel like it's a valuable part of the interview process. Any other thoughts you have on this?
I mean,
dinner?
If you're going to investigate a program and learn more about it, the residents are the program. And if you're not going and meeting the residents at the dinner, you're going to be in the environment with leadership during your interview day. You're not going to meet residents. So, or at least not all of them. This is an opportunity to see a large group of residents. So whether you do them at a house or whether you do them in a restaurant, or the point is go meet the residents, go learn about the program, get the vibe, ask them questions that you don't want to ask the faculty during your actual interview days. There's so much information there that, it's frustrating to have a candidate that doesn't want to go to the dinner. Travel related things happen, weather related things happen. We get that. We understand that. It's sort of those unexcused absences for people that could be there that really don't reflect well on that applicant. So enough said about the dinners.
So now you've reviewed their applications, they have interviewed, and now it's getting towards the end of the interview season, and you have to start putting things together and thinking, how are you going to take all these feedback sources and start thinking about generating a rank list? And the way that we do it is kind of a couple-part process. Certainly we invite everybody that interacts with students when they're on rotations, when they interview, when they come to town, they go to the dinner, to get us feedback. And we try to encourage people to write it down. So usually emailing it is easy because then we can file it and save it. And then later on in the season, it's nice for us to pull up those things and put it together to help them with their file. The second part that we do that we find to be really helpful is right at the beginning of when we're going to start generating a rank list. We start out by just putting numbers into an Excel spreadsheet that are anything from things we reviewed on their application to scores from interview day. And it just gives us version 1.0 of a list. We start with that list and then we put them into thirds, top third, middle third, bottom third of our rank list. We do it alphabetically in each list so nobody knows who would be number 1, number 40, number 80, number 120. And we have a meeting with faculty and residents where we get them together and say, let's just talk about the candidates in thirds and make sure that we have them in the right third. That's what we really try to focus on. Don't focus on who's number 10 or number 20, but focus on if someone's in the top third or the bottom third, is that right? Heading into that meeting, we send an email out with kind of the rules of engagement of that meeting, which we found to be helpful over the years. You know, this is be professional. These are people that in the future could be their colleagues. So let's keep the conversation professional. Everybody that we interview typically is going to go on to match, and they're going to be good residents and good emergency physicians. So keep that in mind heading into it, that we're really going through these subtle things, but these are good people that are going to go on to do good things. We just want to make sure that we have them in the right part of the list that match with kind of who we are as a program. So we send rules out ahead of time. We start the meeting off. It's usually about a 2-hour meeting. We start it off by verbally just reminding people like, hey, here's the rules. Here's how we're going to go through things. And then we essentially spend 2 hours going picture of each person, shown in a conference room with who interviewed them, who did their walking tour, who was the chief that interviewed them, who were the APDs that interviewed them. And it's just a way to say, let's put people's picture up and make sure that if we have them in the top third, middle third, or bottom third, they're in the right spot. Probably the way that it works is the top third and bottom third, we spend the least amount of time with. We really try to spend the most amount of time in the middle third, because that's the area where it's getting closest to, for us most years, probably the end of the top third, bottom of the middle third is where we're going to wind up matching our last person. So we want to make sure we're paying attention to that to make sure that we've got them in the right thirds, but also for that middle group, we will tend to say, do you think they should be in the upper part or lower part? Because that's the difference potentially in matching and not. So that process, by inviting people to give feedback throughout the season, compiling it together, but then coming together in the end with a meeting and spending a couple hours to do it, we found to be really valuable.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to then start the next few weeks for us of getting our match lists generated.
Yeah, and we talk about this like it's a precise science. Like I'm going to run through how we generate the actual numbers and formulas really briefly, just because how we think about it is probably a little different than how other programs think about generating the list. But it's not a precise science. There's a really interesting thing out of UCLA that came out in West Journal of Emergency Medicine last month, where they looked at whether the position on the NRMP rank list was predictive of whether these students turned out to be excellent residents or whether they turned out to be leaders in emergency medicine. And where they were on their rank list had no bearing on whether they were going to be great residents or be leaders in emergency medicine. So it's not a direct correlation. When I look at our lists, our chief residents have very infrequently been the top 3 on our NRMP rank list. They come from everywhere because, again, this is very imprecise. So the way we do it is we score everything, mostly from 1 to 10. So we score their dean's letter. We score all of their SLOEs, or E-SLOEs now. We score, we give a point total to their USMLE Step 1 and Step 2 scores. And we take all of those data points, and those are half of their formula. The other half of their formula are all based on the human factors, and we take them 100% off of their interview scores. So 50% is based on their numbers, their raw data, what they did in medical school, how they performed, what their step scores were, and we do 50% on interviews. And we didn't used to do it that way. It used to be 2/3 based on their numbers and their raw data and 1/3 on interview scores. But I think we're getting more residents that fit better into our program, that have the qualities of, humanism that we're really looking for our particular program by emphasizing the interviews. And when you look at our interviews, we showed you the sheet on how we score these applicants. It's really based on their fit for our program, not are they going to be the best emergency medicine physician in the history of the world. No, it's about how they would fit in our program. And that's really right on that sheet that we're evaluating them with. And the other thing about those sheets is the resident that does the tour will fill one out, the chief resident will fill one out, and the 3 APDs. So we get 5 of them back, and they're all weighted equally. So program director versus resident who did a tour will have the same input as to that resident, because making connections with someone is variable. And a nervous resident in the PD's office may be somebody that the resident really enjoyed touring around. So we weight everything evenly. We give some bonus points for AOA, some bonus points for gold humanism. And at the end, we do make some minor adjustments just based on, where we think people should be. But ultimately, it's a formula that's really got a lot of emphasis on the interviews.
You lose a lot of points if you miss the dinner.
Yeah.
For meatballs.
Yeah.
Then you get moved way down on the rank list.
Yeah.
And for us, I'd say just knowing that the process of the match list is a little bit of an imperfect science, right? You're just taking whatever numbers you want to do and whatever process you want to do to come up with an order. Our focus is a lot more on just, in general, globally, do we have them in the right part of the list?
Yeah.
So we worry more about if someone's 1 through 30 or 90 through 120, then are they 90 or 92 or other things like that? Because we want to make sure that globally we have them in the right part of the list. The other thing that we do probably spend the most time on is knowing that the rank list each year, we've got it down where we get pretty close to where the cutoffs are each year of where our 11th person is going to come from. We do spend a lot of time on that specific part of the match list just to make sure that we really are playing it out person by person. Do we have these people in the right order of getting the right people here? Knowing that a lot of it's out of our control, it's going to be where they put us on the list too. But that is one part that we probably will spend more time on than worrying if someone's number 10 or number 15 or number 70 or number 75. We don't worry as much about that as kind of that middle part, just making sure that number 25 to 35 part of the list we've really got down in the order that makes the most sense.
And it's so imprecise.
Yeah.
Is number 33 versus number 34 and what we think, is that right? I have no idea, but we go through it pretty critically to make sure that we at least have it straight in our heads so we can sleep at night. And the feedback from the residents that we get from that meeting is not to be de-emphasized. That really is valuable feedback. If they decide that someone shouldn't be in the middle third, we listen, we move them, just because they are the ones that are going to have to train next to them and have a different experience with them. And if they really don't feel like they're a good fit for our program, boy, that's really hard for us as leadership to justify having them there.
Or at least gives us pause to say we should follow up with someone and clarify some things.
Yeah,
so that's where sometimes we'll say, like, boy, we're having mixed pictures of what to do with somebody. Let's get in touch with someone who's worked with them more extensively, that wrote their letter, something to help us clarify some of those questions. So that's at least some general tips and a little bit just specifically of how we do it at Regions for each part of that process. We'll turn it over now back to Moshe and Tina, and if people have questions, we'd be happy to stay on and field questions here. This is our contact information, so if after the fact you ever have any questions about anything we said in here or just application season in general, again, we both really like application season, so we're happy to talk more about it or to follow up with you, so feel free to contact us through email. So with that said, we'll turn it over for any questions that may be out there.
Okay, so first of all, thank you both. That was a great presentation, also very timely. For those who would like to ask questions, there are two ways you can do that. If you go on the bottom, if you hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen, you will see a ribbon show up, and one of the buttons on that ribbon says chat. So if you click on that, you can type questions there, and I'll be happy to read them to our presenters. If you prefer to unmute your mic and ask the questions that way, you can do that as well. So feel free to start with that. Someone has already posted a question, so I'm going to start with that one. And the first question is, who pays for the dinners?
It's a great question.
Yeah. So we have it's a part of our budget that we have for recruitment, where we have a certain dollar amount per week that we have for food.
It's roughly $200.
Yeah.
Usually.
What we do here, and I know this is going to be different for different places, is we tried it for a couple of years at restaurants, and now probably for the past 6+ years we've done it where the residents host it at their houses or apartments or complexes where they have a party room. They buy their own food, they make their own food, and they
kind
do
of
it
have
that
fun
way.
doing it. That's
Yeah. For the most part, I'd say a lot of people actually come under budget because when they're doing it on their own, they typically pay attention to the budget, and then it's food alone. That's what we pay for. If anybody brings any drinks or anything like that, that's separate from what we do. We just do food.
right. I picture it like a Gordon Ramsay cooking show where all the residents are trying to figure out how to make something. But honestly, I think it always works out. We're able to feed the applicants. So and having it at the houses is a lot cheaper than restaurants.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I apologize, I didn't specify. That question was from Annette Martinez, excuse me. We have another related question from Kevin Noop, and the question is, who is invited to the dinner and how many?
So it's usually as many, we always want as many residents as we can get there, and having a good showing of residents is really important. Hosting a dinner and having 2 or 3 residents show up it reflects poorly on the program, where you're probably better off not having the dinner in the first place. So as many residents as we can get free from their clinical duties will usually go, and they like hanging out together and doing this. And then we invite the applicants and or their significant others. So it will usually be, if we have 10 applicants, sometimes we'll get 10, sometimes 9. And if there's significant others, it might go up to 11 or 12, but usually it's a smallish group.
Yeah, our interview days are typically once a week, either a Monday or a Friday. We do this the night before. It is nice when the applicants do travel with somebody else. We definitely encourage them to bring them to the evening for them to meet people and ask their questions too. And then it's the same for our residents. The residents will oftentimes bring their significant other, spouse, pet sometimes. And then it turns out to be, 9 to 10 candidates plus a few significant others with probably a similar number, I'd say, at least, to sometimes more, maybe even sometimes 12 to 15 residents with significant others and other people. So that's probably the typical. We do realize that residency is busy. These evenings are extra events for the residents to do and everything. We always talk to them about it at the beginning of the year to make sure that they're comfortable hosting them and coming to them. They typically are. We try to remind them probably periodically during the interview season that, you don't have to make every one, but try to make which ones you can, because the more that people can make, it really is helpful for the applicants and it's helpful for us. So probably a couple times a year, we just will remind them at conference or something like, hey, dinner coming up at Zach's house on Sunday. Make sure you RSVP to him so he knows food wise, but also he can kind of keep track to make sure that we have enough people going. And if it's getting closer to the event, the residents on their own will kind of send little messages out through all their group chat.
Yeah, we put one resident in charge of coordinating them, and their responsibility is to make sure that people show up, and it generally goes with minimal intervention from us. We really don't have to lead this. This is resident driven most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Okay, the next question is from Callie Newman. The question is, what is the best advice you have for a new program?
I guess it would help to know in which area, but I think some of the biggest things are some of the things we covered on here, like that ERAS system. In the beginning, it can be daunting because you get hundreds of applications and there's so many data points and things to review for each candidate that probably getting really comfortable right away with setting up your own filters. And when I say filters, it's just a way to shuffle the deck. You can look at applicants in different ways so that it can help you to review them more systematically, and getting really comfortable with where things are on those tabs so you can kind of quickly click through the things that you want to review early in the process, and what are things that you're okay waiting to review more comprehensively once you've invited them for an interview. So that's probably one big thing.
Yeah, and ERAS will let you set up sub-filters, and being able to look at an application once and then not have to go back to it is really important to me. So if I have an applicant that I consider to be a maybe, I might invite them after I've gone through more. I can then put that in a maybe file. And if it's a yes or a probably, I can have a probably not. I can have a no. You can make as many subfiles as you want. So once you've looked at it, then putting it in a subfile really helps me keep all those applications organized. And so as far as application review, you could, for a new program specifically, there's other areas that it's not just application review. That just happens to be the most daunting, I think, of all of the of this cycle. That's the most time consuming.
Yeah, and then one thing I guess I would recommend for a new program, and we've been doing this forever and we still do it, is that something that can be really valuable to you during interview season is to post interview day, send the applicant that just interviewed with you, give it a week, send them a survey that essentially is just hey, we really want our interview process to be something that's valuable for candidates coming through.
Sure.
We'd love to get input from you on how our day was, and ask them about all the things you want to cover. That can do two things. One, on the fly during the interview season, if you catch something, you can make changes. And two, as the season goes on at the end, you can just look back at the whole thing and say, what worked, what might you want to change heading into the next year. We've done that every year. We've been a program. We still do it because we still find things on there. We're like, that's a really good suggestion. It's something that maybe we've switched from. Years ago, we used to have you coordinate your interviews by calling the program coordinator. Now you do it through Interview Broker. Needing to get feedback on new technology, things like that. So those are probably some good tips.
Yeah, last year we weren't putting out any breakfast because we didn't think anyone would eat it, and we got feedback, and now we're putting out mini muffins. So so you never know what you're going to get out of those surveys.
Right.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, the next question is from Jessica Smith, and her question is, who reviews residency applications? Is it PDs only or general faculty as well?
It's PDs only, and my feeling is keeping it to the fewest number possible to get through all the applications gives you a little bit more of some continuity. And continuity is important because everybody has a different appreciation of different factors in an application that might make an applicant great. And as objective as the SLOEs are, and as much as we try and make it both holistic and objective when we review all these applications, there's a certain amount of inter-rate or variability that's going to be there. Just it has to be. So we try to limit it to as many as we can, to as few as we can, and that way we feel like breaking them down is easier. In our case, I do most of them.
And that's for the initial application review to get invitations going. Then separate from that, once we invite everybody that does an interview that day gets access to their file, because that way ahead of time, we find there's things in the personal statement that sometimes are really good to read and know and review with the candidates, things in their file that are just hobbies, interests, where they used to work, anything in their file that we can get to people interviewing them. It just adds to more things to chat about during interview sessions. But in the beginning, we do try to keep it to a smaller group just to have a little bit more systematic approach to the reviews, which I think has been helpful.
It's a big job. I mean, for whoever's in that small pool of reviewers, they need time to do it. So they have to block out time at the end of September to do these because it really does take a lot of time, and I have to end up taking almost a week off of clinical duty just to get through all the applications.
So the follow-up question to that, you were just talking about how much time it takes. The question is, do you get extra buy-down time for all the time you have to put in screening applications?
Unfortunately, no, and I don't think most people do. I just organize my shifts so that I'll work more at the beginning of September and less at the end of September in order to have time to do this. And program leadership is understanding. They know the process. They've been through the process. This isn't new. And so when when you're carving out your schedule by whatever system you use, you have to clear space. You really do. And whether there's compensation to do it, that's sort of beyond the scope, but you have to carve time out to do these. There's too much to be done.
Well, and I suppose technically, like, you get a certain amount of APD hours to do the role.
Yeah.
That's over a year. So what Brad does is he just knows that, and he knows that in the fall in interview season, he's going to be busier.
It's go time.
So his office time, his time spent on reviewing things is heavier in that time of the year, which means he has a lighter load for resident duties post-interview season, because it has to be a balance. Like, he's so busy from letter writing time through application review to the actual interviews to the match list, that's just kind of how he divvies it up. So that's how we tend to do it here. And we have 3 APDs. Each of their roles just have different time commitments at different times of the year. So the most continuous one is probably the person that does our conference and our curriculum and education. Schedule and operations and quality, we have an APD, and that has certain times of the year where it's really busy and other times it's not as busy. Same thing with student education and recruitment. Like, this is our busy time of the year for students, which leads into a busy time of the year with recruitment, which means post-interview season, his time really goes down from office time, things like that, because he just has to balance it out.
Recruitment never ends. Recruitment is a year.
Yeah.
Clerkship director and doing the APD role. It's kind of a year-round thing, but it's fun.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is from Mohammed Musa. His question is, do you fill out the spreadsheet after you select the candidates for interviews as you go?
So kind of the rank list spreadsheet.
No, we do it at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Just the data that keeps coming in. So step 2 scores come in at variable amounts of time. Sometimes you'll have applicants that are still interviewing and their interview scores are into January because interviews seem to carry on into January. So we will download all the data from ERIS at the very end of the interview season because then we know we're getting the most complete version. If we download it in spreadsheet mid-season, I feel like we would miss scores and then have to go back and find them. And so we really do it right before we have that rank list meeting with the residents so that all the data is then in its newest and truest form.
And really, to get the data from ERAS and generate our own spreadsheet, it doesn't take that long. It's just hitting the right button with the right data, and then from there, we can sort it. We can do different things that we want to do, but if we really don't do much with that until the end of interview season, then we start.
And we don't do it by hand. ERIS has a functionality so that then it will import or export all of the data into a Excel spreadsheet for you. So you don't have to do it all by hand, thankfully. You do have to score them by hand. So each letter of recommend, each SLOE that you're scoring in the dean's letter, there's areas in ERIS to put the scores in. And once you put the score in, then it will export it all.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So anything that you score in ERIS, anything that has a unique data point on its own, like a step score, those numbers can then be pushed out, exported onto your
And those I do in real time. When I invite someone for an interview, I'll then put in their scores. Just it saves time.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Wonderful. Okay, this next question is about the dinners again. This is from Cindy Rush. This question is, do kids come to the dinners?
We've definitely had kids at the dinners because some of the residents that just have small children, they're the ones either hosting it or they're bringing their new baby over to the dinner.
Yeah.
So I'd say yes. I'm trying to think.
We've never
candidates
excluded kids.
brought them because they've definitely brought significant others, and over the years I didn't think anyone brought a small child potentially because people sometimes travel together, but we don't exclude them. So it's not something that we would say they can't do. I'd say probably typically more of the residents would bring their children, and some of it depends on where it's being hosted.
Right.
If it's at the house, how big is it? If it's at someone's apartment complex, they have a larger party room, it's bigger space, it might be different. So that might affect some of the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, this is Minnesota. Everyone's pretty nice here, so I would not allow someone to bring a child. Yeah. It's when you're really trying to do have the residents get to know you and you're trying to get to know the residents, having your children with you would make that difficult. An infant, I don't think anybody would care if an infant was there. So, so again, it really comes down to you are spending that time to get some really critical information both ways. And as long as the kid isn't going to interfere, I think it's fine.
Don't break anything.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from Bianca Andino. And the question is, what are your thoughts between interview days done during the weekend and interview days done during the weekday?
I mean, our main thoughts are we do weekdays just because for us, it's such a time intensive thing that to do them on the weekend for us. So from a program standpoint, it would be hard.
I've never heard of it.
That'd be challenging. I guess I have heard, I guess I don't know what specialties have done it, but I've heard some, but typically I've heard it for those specialties that'll interview like 30 people a day.
Okay.
And they just do it on like 3 Saturdays in December, January, something. But so we haven't done it. I guess I'd say from my standpoint with program coordinator, program manager, APDs, PD, the residents being around to help with different things for the rotations where it's more of weekday rotational type things. For us, it would be really hard with our format to flip it to a weekend, and it would be really hard for me as a program director to ask all these folks to give up a weekend day for interviewing.
There would have to be a specific reason about your program that would make that beneficial, because I think for most programs, their clinical duties carve out enough of their weekends and nobody's looking to do more weekends and getting residents to do things on extra weekends. I would feel bad about. So I think you'd have to have something about your hospital that would make it unique. Otherwise, I think it wouldn't work for me.
Yeah, if you're a newer program and you say, boy, if we had 1 or 2 Saturday type interviews, could that help us to get more people in, get people in that maybe would debate accepting an interview there versus somewhere else if it's on a Wednesday or whatever else? I could see a little utility in that, but I just, over the long term, I think that would really be a drain on the program side, just because it's fun. We love it. Like, we really enjoy interview season. But if you told me I had to do 4 Saturdays, it's now not as much fun because it's just taking away from family time, weekend fun, whatever else. And we already have weekend shift commitments and things like that. So that would at least be our take on it.
Great. Another question from Kevin Noop. And this question is, can you describe the timeline on the calendar when your time is most captured from review of applications and interviews, etc.?
Timeline on the calendar where the application review and interviews are the most time consuming. Is that
Like when we're putting our time into it, would you think that's kind of where we're getting?
Yes, I believe that's what the question is.
That's easy. So September, I don't actually review anything the first couple of days, to be completely honest, just because there's always stragglers, and I don't want to review, if you look at just all the applicants from the University of Iowa, I don't want to review the 10 of them together in a group, in a bundle, like I like to do it with a filter, and then have 2 stragglers come in and then I haven't reviewed them, or I have to go back and do Iowa again. That to me defeats the purpose of trying to use these filters to your advantage to then compare apples to apples. So I do wait a few days. I don't start it until around September 18th or so. And then I would say from then and through the first week of October, I'm quite busy. I don't take all that time off clinically, but I do spend a number of hours each day, even if I have a clinical shift working. And those 3 weeks are pretty intense. After that, when you then get into October and you're starting to invite people, there's then some coordinator work that helps.
Yep.
Then there's less application review. But for those first 3 weeks, I'd say those 3 weeks are pretty intense.
And probably heading into an interview day, once we get the interview days up and running, I probably do about an hour or so prep the day before, the morning of, to get ready for the day.
Yeah, that's fair.
Our days, we're here personally probably from 7:30 till 2:30, 3 o'clock is the length of our day.
Yeah.
And then we do a little bit after. So that's kind of how the time works. And then at the end of the season, a little bit of prep time to get the thirds together, couple-hour meeting to do our review with everybody. And then we typically do 2 to 3, what would you say, couple-hour sessions after that to get our match list into the right kind of order for us.
Yeah, the other thing we do that I haven't mentioned is we put together a fairly extensive wait list. Just from our standpoint, having applicants cancel and have decline their invitations and all those things. We want to have a pool of students that are able and ready to come and interview. And so we do, send out a wait list that we find to be very useful. Most students are eager and happy to be on the wait list, knowing that of the 800 applications we got, only 120 get interviews and another 40 to 60 wind up on the wait list. And generally they'll accept their spots on the wait list. So we do utilize a fairly large wait list.
Okay, another question from Jessica Smith. The question is, are people still interviewing on average 10 students per residency spot? And are you starting in November or October?
Good question.
So that's about what we do, about 10 interviews per spot we match. Yep. And then we typically start in October, which is a combination of, so we actually do 1 day in October that just happens to be whichever students are rotating with us doing their advanced student rotation that month, we interview that month. Our University of Minnesota combined day starting in October. And typically the very end of October is when we start our first, what I would call regular interview day. Then about weekly through the first week in January is when we do our last interview day.
Yeah, here, this is Minnesota, so we want to be done with interviews as early into January as we can. I don't think anyone wants to come to Minnesota in mid-January, and we do a great job of enticing people to train here in mid-January. So we start a little earlier than I think other programs.
Starting in October is probably earlier than most. We hit November really hard, and we really want to be done by the first week of January. So that's a little bit of ours is skewed early. I think most programs start in November, go through December and into January. But in Minnesota, we just try and get them done.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. A tremendous thank you to our speakers, Dr. Hegarty and Dr. Hernandez. That was a wonderful presentation. I love how you guys played off of each other. That was really cool, and certainly a very timely topic. So thank you so much for that information. Thank you all for joining us. Our next Cord Connects session will be August 22nd at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The topic will be how to set up your clinical competency committee. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Have a great day and a wonderful interview season.